All right, today we're getting into the Yahoo 26 to 50 range. Who do I like? Who do I dislike? And who do I think is just fine? Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm Dan Vespers. It's Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. We've got some key names to cover today that stretch from the likes of who the hell's 26? De'Aaron Fox, all the way to the likes of Zion Williamson. We'll give you who I like, who I don't like, and why, most importantly, so that you guys don't yell at me about it if you don't understand sweet, succulent context. I know, it's hard. It's a lot to process. I'm Dan Vespers on social media. You can find me on Twitter at Dan Vespers. You can find all of our shorts over at Old Man Squad Fantasy on Instagram. Old Man Squad on Twitter is a great way to meet the rest of the Old Man Squad crew. And this is very important. We have a brand new, now opened Discord for Old Man Squad, the whole network, not just this show. So it's an opportunity for you guys to see every single show on the network, interact with the hosts, play around, chat with other sports-loving folks. We got football, baseball, basketball, hockey, fantasy, not fantasy, and on and on and on. So please do come join us for that. It would mean a lot to me. And it would mean a lot to the other hosts as well. An opportunity for all of us to kind of get introduced to new stuff. Again, on today's show, we're going to just go through one by one. 26 to 50. This is the latest Yahoo board dropped on October the 2nd, pardon me. And you guys will just get my thoughts on each player. We'll try to spend about a minute and a half on each guy, move through at a decent clip, and you'll know how I feel at that point on everybody in the top 50 from the last couple of shows we've done. You also know we did sleepers, which is 50 to 120 range. We did late flyers from 120 on, and that'll basically knock out the rank part of how we're interpreting this latest Yahoo board. Let's not wait any longer. You guys have done all the other stuff. You've hit the like button. You've commented. You've subscribed. You perhaps even left a 5-star review to help us power boost up the rankings. Let's talk about De'Aaron Fox, who is less polarizing in fantasy analyst circles this year than I thought he'd be. I think De'Aaron Fox is generally just fine, although I also lean ever so slightly. It's like the combo. I was doing emojis on Twitter of a contented face, which is something like this. If my face was going to be an emoji, this is the content Dan. But also, I was using poop emojis for guys I didn't like. And so for Fox, who's like contented, but maybe a little bit constipated as far as my emojis go, it's probably something like this. Like, I think it's going to be all right, but I'm also not super excited about it. Last year, Fox was number 24 in 9 category leagues. He had an otherworldly season from the steals standpoint. He had 2 per game, including, I think it was like 2.3 over the last month or two last year. He also took 21 shots a night, 6 free throws, 5.5 assists. A lot of the offense does still run through Domantas Sabonis, but this is a team that's going to be working DeMar DeRozan in. And I typically fade star-level players when they're bringing in new, higher-usage teammates. For that reason, I think it'd be smart, if you could, to get De'Aaron Fox about a half round later, maybe a little bit more than that. But the other thing about Fox is he's not a great foul shooter, and he's the prime target in the early 3rd round for anybody punting free throws. So there's this balance to strike for him of, hey, if you're playing straight 9-cat roto, you probably don't take him at 26. If you're playing head-to-head and you're building a team that perhaps doesn't need what he's weakest at, then you do. And so it's hard for me to call that a classic poop emoji in this instance, because there's very different ways that he fits on a team build. But if we're just going straight ranks at the end of the year, then he probably leans towards not being someone I'd want there. Paul George at number 27 is the next name on the list. He's obviously moving to a very different situation. He was at 17 shots, 4 free throws, 3.5 assists last year, playing alongside Kawhi Leonard and just ahead of James Harden in the pecking order. Now he falls behind Joel Embiid, a 22-shot per game guy last year, and Tyrese Maxey, who ended up around 20 shots per game. But yes, a lot of that came after Embiid went down. The question is, can Paul George get up to 17 shots a game again? I'm inclined to think the answer is no. But at the same time, last year, he was number 11 on that type of number. And 27 affords him a pretty good amount of wiggle room. So I actually like Paul George at 27. I think he's probably going to be a mid to late second rounder, which gives you about a half round of buffer there. And I get it. That's not that much in the grand scheme of things. But when we're talking about these guys that are still pretty close to the top of the board, any opportunity to end up earlier, I think, is a good opportunity. Lauri Markkanen is the next one on the list at number 28, and he's another guy where it's two different schools of thought. Markkanen was number 13 per game last year, but he only played in 55 out of 82 ball games. It's very hard to hit value when you're not healthy. And so if you're number 13 and you're missing a third of the season, he drops down to number 51 by totals. Games cap roto, I would take a shot on Markkanen in this range. I think he probably plays more like 62 to 65 games this coming season instead of 55, even with the Jazz mostly tanking. I feel like the last 3 weeks is when you usually see shutdown stuff. And then Markkanen and other injuries sort of pushed that longer, and you got this big 27-game drop-off. Something more like 15 to 20 games missed probably feels a little bit more reasonable. And that gets him basically right around where he's at by totals. So for Markkanen, I think he's a just fine, but I probably wouldn't do it in head-to-head because the games he's likely to miss are the games that are likely to be in your fantasy playoffs. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything sports betting. Every stat, matchup breakdown, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games, they've got them. With the largest catalog of odds on everything from football, baseball playoffs, hockey, NBA, even political props, they've got that too. When the game's over, head down to the BetOnline online casino, get in on some blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline. The game starts here. After Lauri Markkanen is Tyrese Maxey at number 29, who's another guy that I think has been moved down the board about the right amount. He actually didn't, his rank was 22 by totals last year. Per game, I think he was basically right around that. 19 by total, so pretty much the same both ways. His rank didn't change that much when Embiid went down. Kind of an interesting little Tyrese Maxey footnote is that his efficiency suffered so much without Embiid that his 9-cat rank was actually worse when he was the last man standing for that club. He shot 44.5% instead of mid to high 40s. So there's going to be kind of a balancing with Maxey as well. He probably falls off from top 20, but look, he's being drafted around 30, which in my opinion is pretty accurate. He probably takes a round hit with Paul George coming to town. I don't think he's going to do little. Joel Embiid is liable to crash and burn at any point this year. And if you get more efficient Maxey, then he could push up towards that second round. Or maybe he does less than we expect and he falls back more towards the late third round. So you probably drafted him right smack in the middle of his expected outcomes, which is basically from 20 to 40. Right in the middle, that, friends, is the definition of just fine. Alperen Sengun at number 30 is a polarizing one. He has been for multiple years now for whatever reason, fights about what he can and cannot do on a basketball court. Offensively, he's extremely gifted. He averaged 21, 9, and 5 last year with a solid 1.2 steals. That was good for a center. Doesn't block that many shots. Field goal percent was pretty good, but he doesn't take the three. His free throw was bad, and his turnovers are relatively high. So you have this structure that fits much better in head-to-head than Roto. Even though when people think about Şengün, the first thought is, he's an extremely well-rounded center because he passes. But when we talk about well-rounded, I want us to be thinking more about guys that don't have the sort of strong underachieve or negative category. For threes, for instance, he was at half a three per ball game. I get it. He's a center. You don't have to get threes out of your center, but that's an extraordinarily low number. Perhaps more importantly, he was at 0.7 blocks per game. That's probably not going anywhere. Free throws, 69% on pretty high volume. Turnovers, mid to high twos. I'm not worried about the injury thing. That's not something that creeps into my mind with Şengün. My fear with Şengün is, and like, look, this is just the long and short of how the numbers bore themselves out. If you cared about free throws for whatever reason, and I try to throw this disclaimer on as many shows as I can, so we'll do it just one more time here. That can mean a lot of different things. If you don't care about free throws, why? Are you punting them completely? Are you so well off in free throws that taking a bad foul shooter doesn't really impact your team like all that much? So maybe you had, I don't know, maybe you end up with Joel Embiid and Damian Lillard as your first 2 picks. I don't know how often that's going to happen, but those guys more than cover up Şengün's negative. So in that one instance, you're technically punting free throws. You don't care that he was bad at them last year because you have so much, it doesn't matter. You're still very, very good because you had the 2 best foul shooters by volume in the NBA for fantasy. In all likelihood, you're probably not going to have both of those guys. For me, personally, I do tend to care about free throws, about turnovers, about the little things, the 9 categories across the board. And I get it. Luka, Giannis, there are a couple of, forgetting one other player. Like, there are a handful of first rounders where you go into an I don't give a crap about my free throw build. Şengün makes a lot of sense, actually, at pick 30. But for the majority of fantasy teams, he's probably not a great choice there. And this we talk about, too. We say, oh, well, Dame covers up Şengün. Yes, but you didn't get any blocks. And your rebounds out of Şengün were good, but not great. So at some point along the way, if you want a team that's good at blocks or rebounds, you're probably going to end up having to take another horrible free throw shooting center. And that means you would have had to need to build up more buffer against it. So these things are all cumulative. Nothing occurs in a vacuum. Understanding both of those elements, I think, is really important to understanding why I don't like Şengün at 30, because I think it just sets you behind a little bit. I don't like taking a guy in the early going that has that large negative when I don't have to. That's to say, it's why you guys know I'm not a massive fan of Trae Young in the first round, although his is an easier pill to swallow, because for Trae Young, it's turnovers, and everybody is a bad turnovers guy in the first round. So that one is a little bit more of a wash, as opposed to Şengün, who, looking up and down the board, like, just looking at the Yahoo board alone. Here, let's just do a quick scan here. I think Şengün is the second worst free throw impact guy in the top 30 behind Giannis. Where's Domantas Sabonis? How did that balance out last year? Sabonis was... The hell are you, Domantas? Yeah, Şengün was a worse negative impact guy. Sabonis was at 70% on 5 a game, and Şengün was 69% on 5.5. So it wasn't that big of a gap. But that's the thing. Like, if you're going to draft the third worst free throw shooting dude in that upper zone, you better have a pretty good plan around how you're going to do it. I don't know. Did that explanation make sense? I don't know who I'm asking. You guys can't respond to me right now. You can respond in the comments. Did that explanation make sense? Here's the thing. Even if you disagree and you want to take Şengün, like, I'm not going to kill you. He's going to do a lot of good, and maybe his free throw percent goes up by 3. Maybe he's 72% instead of 69. That elevates him by like a round and a half, probably, in 9-cat numbers. So it's all very fluid. Cade Cunningham at 31 is a just fine for me. I got no problem with Cade here. I know he wasn't anywhere near this mark last season, but it's worth pointing out that down the stretch, Cade was in the 40s. He was number 42 over the season's final 2 months on really solid 24, 5, and 7.5 numbers. The steals were weirdly low. I would assume those are actually a little bit better. Great foul shooter, not going to be particularly strong field goal, and he's a bad turnovers guy. So again, pretty easy one to just kind of forget about. If you're punting turnovers, 8-cat, Cade Cunningham has a really decent chance, actually, to get into this range, and 9-cat, maybe a little bit behind it. So just fine. I like all 3 of the next guys in certain, however, increments. Freddie VanVleet at 32. I mean, how many times have I talked about him on the podcast? So we're not going to go deep into the Freddie VanVleet thing. It's the same argument I heard last year. Oh, they've got all these young guys that are just going to take his minutes. No, they're not. He's the floor general. They love his defense. They love his assists. They love his floor spacing. They love his leadership. The guys that are in jeopardy of losing minutes to the young guys are everybody between VanVleet and Şengün. Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., Dylan Brooks. Look out, guys, because Amen Thompson and Tyrese and Cam Whitmore and Reed Shepherd, they're coming for you. But Freddie's going to be fine. He was number 17 per game last year. He was also weirdly durable, which I don't even think we were really counting on. But it's pretty weird to be able to get a guy who played mostly a healthy season last year, 15 slots behind where he finished last year without any marked personnel changes. Jalen Williams at 33 is a guy I like, although he slid a little closer to just fine here. Remember, he was going in the early 40s for a while. He ain't anymore. But Jalen Williams was awesome last year. He was basically number 35 the last 4 months of the season. I think the last 2 months, where was Jalen at the last 2 months? Number 32, with room to improve. So I'll take him here. Even if he turns out to be just fine instead of a win, I'll still take him here. Jalen Johnson at 34. And his ADP is much later than this. I don't really know why. And if he explodes in the preseason again, then that might not stay true. But Jalen Johnson was super fun to roster last year, other than the injury stuff. And it feels like he is just ripe to go bananas this season with over a steal, just under a block, probably somewhere near 20 points and 9 rebounds and 4 assists. And you just hope that he shoots over 70% at the foul line and pushes himself closer and closer to being like an 8 out of 9 category kind of guy. Probably a tiny, I don't know, honestly, he might be a positive in 3-pointers this year if he gets a little more usage up there. Field goal is probably going to be a positive or neutral. So you're just hoping for a little bit more free throw out of him, percentage-wise. And I think Jalen Johnson's a guy that I really like taking a shot on this year because I think there's a ceiling we haven't seen yet. Jaren Jackson Jr. at 35 is just fine, but he's a different kind of just fine because he's a guy where the sky is the limit for rank, and it's going to tie to his shot blocking, but the floor could fall out and he could coast down to the center of the earth. I'm inclined to pass on JJJ because of how wide that swing could be. I don't want to take that kind of shot. I'd rather take the Jalen Johnson shot, which is like, yeah, he could be a little bit behind, but he could also be a little bit ahead. And with JJJ, I mean, this could end up being the pick of the season in the 30s, or it could be an unmitigated disaster, and I just don't have the stomach for that. DeJounte Murray at number 36 is just fine. Yep, you gathered it. He opened up around 24, and I said, that's way too frickin' early. And now he's later, and that's fine. He was number 38 with Atlanta last year. He probably slides back just a little bit. But, like, really, friends, what's the difference between 36 and, like, 42? DeJounte's probably going to finish per game in the 40s. If he's healthy, he could beat this rank by totals. And he's going to put up solid numbers in scoring, assists, steals. Could his percentages improve? Yeah, I mean, we'd like that. I don't think you can bank on it, but it sure would be nice if it happened. I'm not taking DeJounte unless I absolutely have to, but I do think that this is a perfectly fine spot for him to be, which is end of third, beginning fourth, somewhere in that neck of the woods is totally fair. Bam Adebayo at 37. I went back and forth on Bam quite a bit, actually, in how I wanted to present this stuff. And ultimately, I'm going to go with Bam as a just fine. I think he finishes back of this mark per game. Because we're talking about a guy that was number 51 last year. But he was also a little low at the free throw line at 75.5%. That's a number that could tick back up 77, 78, 79. We've seen him get into that range before. And that would basically push him to where he's being drafted. And if you happen to be punting Blocks, he's not a big block center. He's obviously not a three-point shooting center either, but he passes relatively well. He was 4 assists a game last year. There's just a lot of stuff to like about Bam. And again, like I've talked before about how I kind of like punting blocks this year, and Adebayo is a guy you can grab at that end of third, beginning fourth that fits that build nicely. He gets you a lot of the center stuff and a positive in assists and steals out of the center position without hurting you much in free throw, and also doesn't really block that many shots. So there's an interesting little pairing going on there. Evan Mobley at number 38 is also a just fine. I think Mobley could have a pretty good year. He was number 42 last season. Maybe you see his minutes tick back up from 30 and a half to like 32, and that's how he pushes into the late 30s. Steals, blocks, boards, assists, field goal percent. Not an atrocious free throw number. He's very similar to Bam, with the big gap there that Bam's a better foul shooter and better at steals, and Mobley is a better shot blocker. And so either way, you can cover up the damage they did in free throws pretty easily. Like, it really wasn't that big of a difference between those two guys, especially when you consider the weighted volume of it, because Bam took 2 more free throws a game than Mobley. I think I'd probably rather have Mobley because you're chasing a little bit of upside there. But again, if Bam fixes his free throw stroke, then he wins that one. It's almost a coin flip between those two guys. So not a strong preference. Both totally fine. End of third, beginning fourth kind of centers. Draft with confidence. Paolo Banchero at number 39. He's on my do not draft board, and I've explained it 1,000 times, and 1,000 times someone out there is going to yell at me about it. They're like, oh, he's a punt guy. He's not. He's not a punt guy. A punt guy is someone who you can fix by removing their worst category. To get Paolo Banchero up to number 39 last year, you had to remove his 3 worst categories. What's he going to do? Is he going to get better again? Maybe. Potentially. But it's a really weird bleeping swing to take at this exact spot. To spend your 4th round pick on a guy that you need to take a massive step forward just to get to the 4th round. Just don't do it. Once in a blue moon, it'll work, and you'll feel like the smartest person on the planet. But the blue moon doesn't come around all that often. The hope that you may have is that his field goal percent continues to tick up, because his free throw percent actually stayed almost exactly the same year over year. It even went down by 1%. And his rebound stayed the same. The rebound rate stayed the same. The assist rate went up a little bit. Steals and blocks are kind of meh. And I ain't playing more than 35 minutes a game that he got last year. And maybe there's an extra shot for him, but that's still not close to number 39 without punting multiple categories. I cannot, in good conscience, recommend drafting a player where you need them to punt 2 things to get to that rank spot. It's too much to overcome. Jimmy Butler is pre-ranked at 40. I like Jimmy Butler at 40. I think he's worth a shot there. Although, again, I've talked about this before. You can only take one risk in the 4th round, and you've got Kawhi and you've got Jimmy both going in the 4th. Between those two guys, I'd rather have Kawhi Leonard, because he, in my opinion, is almost a guaranteed top 6 per game guy this season. I would probably bet my everything I own that he's top 10 per game. And with Butler, I would only feel comfortable saying that, bet everything I own, if you were like top 35. Because he was number 28 last year, and he's an injury risk. 28 is still way ahead of 40 by a full round, and he was super low in steals last season, so those perhaps come back a little bit, and maybe he pushes earlier again. I think Butler has some wiggle room here. I think you're going to get Jimmy pushing it a little bit harder this season, because I think he's probably heard a little bit of the slander. But between the risk guys in the 4th, I'd far prefer Kawhi. So if that's the decision you're making, go Kawhi Leonard instead of emo Jimmy Butler. And I see that picture on my screen now of emo Jimmy Butler, and I just think about the first 15 minutes of Starting 5 on Netflix, which has Jimmy, LeBron, Tatum, Sabonis, and Anthony Edwards following them through this past season and talking about how Jimmy likes to do this on Media Day. Basically, so that websites like this one, Yahoo, have to use that picture all season long. That's so freaking funny. What a weirdo. Desmond Bane at number 41 is the definition of just fine. He was 33 last year. Ja's going to come back, get him a little more open, but take away some of his usage. And Bane is just a quality top 50 fantasy player with a little bit of upside beyond early 40s. If the efficiency is good, like if the turnovers come down and the field goal percent maybe comes up a little bit, yeah, I know he's not going to do as much. And so that counterbalances it. He probably finishes between 40 and 45. This is an absolutely perfect ranking for him finally. Derek White at number 42. Nobody believes he can do it again, but in actuality, he has a shot, if healthy, to be better than last year. He was 27th in 9-cat last season with Kristaps Porzingis there for most of the year. Throw all that usage back in the pool, and yeah, I know Tatum's going to take some, and Jalen Brown's going to take some, and those two guys probably get the lion's share of it. But Derek White's probably going to get a shot out of this. One, don't you think? Half a shot, one shot. If he can replicate his efficiency from last year, then that's just gravy. That pushes him from 27 up to, what do we think? 23? 24? Doesn't have to be much. But either way, he's going in the 40s. So have at it. Ja Morant at 43. This is always going to be one of those things, and it's because Yahoo has to aggregate their lists into one mighty ring to rule them all kind of thing. Ja Morant, as exciting and unbelievable as he is as a basketball talent, is not particularly well suited for 9-category fantasy leagues. He is maybe the premier argument for why to play a points league instead of a category league. I'm not going to do it because I think points leagues are boring. But Ja Morant was a big positive in scoring at 26 points per game. This is the last time he played most of a season. 6 boards, 8 assists, a steal. 1.5 3-pointers wasn't great, but like the counting stats were massive for Ja. But high volume, 46.5% from the field. Medium negative there. High volume, 75% at the free throw line. Medium to large negative there. 3.5 turnovers a game, kind of a big negative there. Now, the upshot with Ja is that if you're playing 8-cat, he rockets himself basically all the way up to this area. So you can make a reasonable argument to take Ja near 43 if you're totally punting turnovers. And frankly, like, if you have a lot of high turnover guys, that allows you to... It's the same thing as with Şengün's free throw, and it's kind of where the -1 ranking stuff comes in. You might be punting a particular category for 2 very different reasons. But if you're drafting Ja in the 4th round, you almost definitely need to be punting turnovers. Whether that means you drafted 3 guys early that were low turnover dudes, which is a possibility. Maybe you started with Tyrese Halliburton at the top of the draft. That's only 2.3 turnovers a game. Maybe in the 2nd round, you ended up with, I don't know. I don't want Chet Holmgren there, but he was only 1.6. You got 2 guys that average the same number of turnovers together as Trae Young. So your team could definitely handle a Ja Morant turnover bop in the 4th round, and you'd be fine. So you're effectively punting turnovers because you were so good at them after 2 rounds. And then there's the flip side of like, I've already got Trae Young and Domantas Sabonis. Screw it, I'll just take Ja Morant. Now you're getting hurt in stuff like 3-pointers. You can make up that a little bit later on, but it's not going to break you. So I don't like him here if you're playing straight 9-cat, but -1 Ja gets you there. Same as Şengün gets you there in the -1 rankings. And I think, who the hell else were we talking about? Is someone I didn't like a ton at the beginning. Shoot. Who was it? Who did I forget? No, it was Şengün. Paolo was the only one that I didn't like there, and he required a triple punt. So that's not -1, that's -3. So error sound effect. Franz Wagner at number 44 gets a poop emoji from me. Not because he's a -1. He's like the opposite of that. Franz Wagner was just totally fine in almost every category last year. Small, positive in points. Small, underachieve in threes. A little bit lower than your average guard or wing. Rebounds were kind of fine. Assists were fine. Steals were fine. Blocks were not great, but field goal, free throw, both okay to good. Turnovers weren't bad. There's a lot to like about Franz Wagner. He, frankly, reminds me an awful lot of like a Michael Porter Jr. without the three-pointers. By the way, those guys were ranked right next to each other last year. MPJ, 1.5 extra threes and 1.5 extra rebounds. Franz, 3 extra points, and then everything else was almost... Oh, no, Franz beat him in steals. Sorry, I forgot about that one. But percentages were almost exactly the same between those two guys. Or like a cheap version of Tobias Harris, who was also a 48-88 percentages guy, like Franz, who was 48-85, and Michael Porter was 48-84. I typically like these kinds of guys, but the reason I typically like these guys is because they often go later than their rank. And Franz, for some reason, is going 2.5 rounds ahead of where he finished last year, even though, unfortunately, for better or worse, his role is not going to change all that much season over season. So if you're drafting him at 44, you're hoping Franz gets the three-point touch. Because that's how he gets up there, is by hitting, 2.5, 3-pointers a game instead of 1.5, which might also fix the field goal percent a little bit better. But otherwise, I don't think things change all that much. And so, nah. Immanuel Quickley at number 45 is just fine. I liked him in the 5th round as a winner. In the 4th round, I think I see him as kind of a break-even guy. He may need someone, frankly, to be hurt for a while to beat this marker. I think Quickley probably finishes somewhere between 45 and 65, which is why I kind of liked him at 55, because the upside was he could beat it on his own, or if anybody goes down, then he definitely gets to beat it. And now you're drafting him a little bit closer to the front end of that what is he when the Raptors are healthy kind of window. So, Now, again, we could do the -1 thing. Quickley, not a good field goal percent guy. Not a great steals. I guess the steals are not that bad. They're fine. So it's really field goal percent. But do you have to? Like, my beef with that type of thing, and it's part of why I don't draft off the -1 board as much as some of the listeners are yelling at me like, this guy goes there, it's fine. It's totally fine to go there. Well, because I think you can get guys like that fit your team more perfectly later on. That is to say, you can cover some of the stats that you're not going to get from your very hyper-specific guys. Like, if you're planning on taking Scoot Henderson in the 9th or 10th round, you don't need to take Immanuel Quickley in the 4th. You're going to get your scoring and your assists and your god-awful field goal percent at a basement price later on. You don't have to spend a 4th rounder on it when you could... Who the hell else have we been talking about in this 4th round? You can go get your blocks from a Miles Turner, or go get your well-rounded stuff from a Derek White, or if you go back to Desmond Bane or whatever, you just, you don't have to surrender to just being the worst at a thing and overdoing it, especially when late in a draft, you're going to be targeting guys that have that specific weirdo build, whatever it might be. 5 names to go. Miles Turner at 46. He is just fine. Just fine. He was going earlier than this before, and I was wondering why, because he finished at 55 last year in 27 minutes a game, and it doesn't seem like the Pacers really want to burn him out in minutes. But any extra minute for Miles Turner is a way for him to sort of inch his way forward. I think he probably finishes around top 50, so this is a perfectly reasonable spot for him to get not a ton of rebounds, but, decent percentages from your big man and a really nice blocks infusion with actually a little bit of points as well. Jalen Brown at number 47. He pissed me off last year. He had a big downturn in free throw stroke last season that was very, frankly, hard to see coming, because he'd been on a slow and steady uptick at the foul line pretty much throughout his young career. He's not an old dude. Jalen Brown opened up his career back in 2016. He was a 69% free throw shooter, went down to 64, then 66. Then it jumped up to 72, 76, 76, 77, 70. Just fell off a map again last year. If that comes back up to 76, this is exactly where Jalen Brown belongs. And until I see the bad free throw shooting twice, I don't think I can say, oh, yeah, he's definitely more like a top 75 guy now. I'll admit, while I am saying he's totally fine to go at 47, I'm probably not drafting him there because I'm so worried that the free throw stroke isn't coming back. But the rest of his game tells you he should go there. And if you're punting free throws, then again, he can go there. But the nice thing about this one is you could use that -1 rank board, but he might fix it on his own because we've seen him do it for like 4 years. Kawhi Leonard at number 48. This is a shot I'm taking 100 times out of 100 now, and it's just math. At pick 48, we only need Kawhi Leonard to play about 55 games, and he beats this. Possibly even a little bit less, because we just talked about Lauri Markkanen playing in 55 games, and he was number 51. Kawhi is probably going to be number 6 or better this coming season. I've gone on record as saying I think he could be top 4 or better. I mean, legitimately, he could play like 50 games, and he would get to late 4th round by totals. So anything over that is just icing on the cake. If Kawhi Leonard gets to 58 to 60 games, easy win. If he gets into the low 60s, 62, 63, he's a second rounder. If he gets into the mid to high 60s, he's a first rounder. That's all it takes. So I'll take Kawhi in the 4th round every time. One of my favorite picks on the board now with him down at 48, especially if we find out that he's like very close at the start of the season because he said he wants to be ready to go. Pascal Siakam at number 49 is almost the exact same explanation as Jalen Brown. He finished at 78 last year, but it's because his free throws took a weird nosedive. He's not a bad, he's not a good foul shooter, but he's not a bad foul shooter. Or at least he wasn't until he went to Indiana. Career 77%er shot 70% with the Pacers, and so his season number was goofy low. Last year, he shot 76% at the line. All the other stuff was almost exactly the same, and he was around top 50. It's annoying that one category falling 6 percentage points can be such a big deal, but it is. So I'm fine with it there. I think it could come back on its own. And then, of course, if you don't care about it, then that makes that decision a little easier. As is the case with Zion, who I'll admit is more like the Şengün and Ja Morant discussion than he is like the Siakam and Jalen Brown discussion, because we've never seen Zion not be a huge negative in free throw percent. Now, 70% last year, like, we're starting to inch along a little bit with Zion, but at the same time, he gets there so often that the volume of 70% shots he's taking is kind of overwhelming for a fantasy team. And that's where he's been the last couple of seasons, at somewhere between 7 and 8.5 free throws a game. So he's doing a lot of damage there. The steals and blocks were at 1.8 combined. That was a career best for Zion. The field goal percent was a little bit lower this last year, specifically just didn't quite finish as well. Perhaps that comes back. Maybe. We don't know. And that moves him up the board a little bit. But Zion was 111 this past season in straight 9-cat. Punting free throws, he was number 50 on the dot. So this is one of those strict, like, yeah, you could draft Zion here, but also you're not getting the traditional big man stats out of him. You're getting field goal percent, but you're not getting rebounds or blocked shots. So in my mind, it's hard to swallow that free throw percent pill unless you're punting free throws. Then it's a little bit easier, because then you're probably also hunting big men who do guard stuff, like get steals and assists, which he does. So he fits that build extraordinarily well. And don't worry, you'll get your three-pointers somewhere else. You're not going to want to punt multiple guard things at the same time. But if you're not punting free throws, I just can't wrap my head around the logic of it. Oh, he gives me 23 points and 6 boards and 5 assists, and I get it, and I like all that stuff. But we just talked about a guy going 8 slots earlier in Desmond Bane who scored more than Zion, rebounded 1.5 less, assisted a half more. And I get it. Now, some of it's positional eligibility stuff, but like, why not Pascal Siakam? What's the big difference there between those two dudes? The field goal percent? Okay. I guess that's a thing, but like they scored about the same. Siakam actually rebounded better. The assists were pretty close. Siakam had more threes. The steals were not that different. Siakam shot 54%. He's not doing as much good there as Zion, but doesn't break you at the foul line. I just, in my mind, like the math of it, I can't get over the math of it. There are just other options you could take there that don't require you to retool your team build to accommodate one guy's god-awful foul stroke. In as much as, and Josh was kind enough to have me on Locked On Fantasy Basketball earlier this week, and we went into a long discussion on like what is the value of an actual rank board. And the answer really is you need a bunch of them, which is why we talk through all of this stuff. You need to not only have the rank, but you need to understand why guys where they are and what it means. And for someone like Zion, there has to be a lot of context. Okay, he's at 111 instead of 50 because he's a bad foul shooter. And, you know, in a given head-to-head week, you might get a good Zion week, you might get a bad Zion week. More often than not, you're going to get a bad Zion free throw shooting week. And over the entirety of a regular season, that does tend to convey a big negative on the category. But you get to a playoff week, and then in that point, you're like, well, if you were planning on being mid-pack in foul shooting, and you can somehow find your way back to it, you might accidentally win that category, even against a team that's projected to beat you, if you catch Zion on a week where he shoots 77% at the line instead of 64 or something like that. So there's all this stuff to think about on the head-to-head side, but at the same time, you got to get there. And if Zion's been blowing up your free throw number for the 18, 19 weeks of your fantasy regular season, and you drafted him at 50, and you were not punting free throws, you've set yourself so far behind the 8 ball for those 18 weeks that even if the playoff odds are more of the coin flip crapshoot kind of thing, wouldn't it be more fun to have gotten a top 2 seed by maybe winning free throws 5 or 6 weeks more than you did instead of going, 5-13 or 6-12 or whatever in foul shooting? Wouldn't it have been nice to go 9-9 if we're doing 18 weeks or something like that? That's important. That could be the difference between making the playoffs and not, or getting a bye and not. And while I understand and I do buy into this notion of like the week-to-week bounce, I thought it was a really fun discussion, and I highly recommend you guys all go check out that episode. I forget exactly what it's called, but you guys know Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Josh and I talked for like 20, 25 minutes on how all of this stuff comes together. And with percentages being a greater fluctuation week to week, it's harder to rely on winning them in your head-to-head playoffs. You want to try to amass as much of the counting stuff as you can. I just think you can get as much counting stuff as Zion in that same part of the draft without taking the big percentages negative hit. And Siakam might be the best example that we could pull out because he's right next to him on the board. They scored almost exactly the same number of points last year. Siakam was at 22. Zion was at 23. Siakam out-rebounded him by 1. Zion had an extra half assist per game, I think, over Siakam. Zion beat him by 0.2 steals and actually beat him by more blocks than I realized. And then Siakam wins the free throw battle by a very large margin, and that's your choice there. So it's also important to remember that, like, if you're not worried about percentages and week-to-week variance, then the positive that Zion brings in field goal percent also needs to be discounted a little bit as well. Not as much as free throws, because you have more field goal attempts in a given week than free throw attempts. One is less bouncy than the other. But, again, like, unless you're attacking field goal percent and you want to have, like, a team that shoots 59% for the year, you could just as easily lose that. So I just say minimize the risk there. Improve your regular season attack. And then, playoffs will be what the playoffs will be. But get there, and I think try to get a good seed by just trust the math on this one, even if it doesn't always make perfect sense. And that, good friends, is 26 through 50. Once again, we went longer than expected, but that's what you get here on Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Follow Old Man Squad on Twitter, Old Man Squad Fantasy on Instagram, at Dan Bespris. That's me. I'm over on Twitter. We're going to be doing lots of stuff over there. So please do. You should, you must, you need to follow me on Twitter. Check out the Discord link in the show description. Come join us over there. Hang out, talk sports, all different sports with all different amazing hosts, part of the Old Man Squad Network. Hit that like button, subscribe on the way out. And we'll be back tomorrow, Friday. Our 2-pack is going to be an update of the breakouts board, and we'll have a chat with Kingy. Adam King is on to give us some of his prime targets on the board here, the latest Yahoo revision number 3. I need to rest my voice, man. I don't know why it's so cooked today, but it is, and I made it. Congratulations to me, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. I'm Dan for Old Man Squad. Later for now.